Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to part 3 of a critique of Star Wars The Last Jedi. This is the final part in the series. Oh, and as you guys may know, this part was delayed because I have several added bits and bobs from comments, as well as answering a few things here and there, to really make this series complete. For example, the word decimate has a primary definition, and that is to kill, destroy, or remove a large portion of. It then also has an outdated historic usage where you essentially kill 1 out of 10 men in a group to try and quell a mutiny or some such, which considering this film is an interesting connection, I suppose. Anyway, I think you get the point for all the commenters who parroted that I am not allowed to use that word. Don't worry, I'm going to use loads of synonyms this time around. Something I would like to open with quick is that I didn't mention how Luke said Snoke got to him first, in reference to Kylo's downfall. This detail is important as it would appear that Kylo was taken rather than lost, which makes Luke's abandonment all the more difficult to accept. But I mean, he can't really do anything at this point that we won't be surprised at, because we don't have anything to work from anymore, right? He's just a completely new character. And some people misunderstood the issue with the whole everyone has the Force thing. I'm absolutely okay with any individual training and becoming a wielder of Force powers. I am certain that anyone can, but when you jump to unlimited power immediately with no training or understanding of the Force, it is incredibly frustrating as you are screwing with universal rules. Hey, Yoda, 800 years of mastery? Who cares? Apparently Rey was born with it. Hey, Palpatine, you've been building an empire and power for decades? You should have hired Rey to do it for you. Hey, Vader, most powerful Force user? No, here comes Rey. Failure is the best teacher, right? The motif of the film? Well, Rey dominates with or without this theme, and it's hard to swallow because if you're telling me that Rey-like people are going to start popping up everywhere, then that's a really sad reality about how the Force now works. Something I missed was that if the Codebreaker asked the First Order for a ship and resources in exchange for information, then why wouldn't they simply torture it out of him? They are shown to be incredibly militaristic and damning of their opponents, regardless of morality. They do not tend to be even remotely fair, but they are here for some reason. I suppose it was for the realization that the Codebreaker betrayed Finn and Rose. Like, it makes for a much more interesting story that he would sell them out as opposed to we just find out he's dead and they have the information, because that sounds as though he was tortured to death, which is just a horrible ending for his character, versus he was a traitor. Remember, it was nicely shot, with him coming in from the side, even though they've been in that room for a decent chunk of time and they should probably have seen him already, but you know, never mind. Also, I missed something in this scene. Phasma says she wants to kill them in a manner that makes it hurt, and she opts for decapitation. Why bother with an instant kill method if the goal was to make it hurt versus a blaster shot? A blaster shot to the legs, for example, would hurt a large amount more than the decapitation would, as you would be alive for the duration. Oh wait, don't you guys see? Captain Phasma is stupid. That explains that. Also, many people are angry that I hadn't included the line from the Resistance that they wanted to divert their shields to the engines, and that explains the bridge and the hangar being blown away by Kylo. I'm sorry I didn't take this argument seriously, but for those people who do, let me debunk it as bad writing for you. In the history of space battles, the best you get is shields being blasted down over time.
Well, have you noticed the shields are still up? Sorry, Master.
A ship like the Radis is enormous and canonically had extremely powerful shields, yet when the bad guys show up, literally the beginning of the battle, Ryan needed the bridge to be blown out despite the shields being at maximum. Otherwise Leia would not have her scene. But he also needed to do this without affecting the ship much at all. So how do you go about doing something like that? Well, he has a throwaway line to say that they are diverting the shields to the engines. This means that every other area of the ship is now open to attack. That's ridiculous as a decision when enemy fighters have been scrambled, on top of the fact that the shields should be more than capable of surviving the blasts at least for a little bit, as that is their purpose. This plan to focus the shields on the engines at the cost of your own hangar bay, bridge, and, well, the entire ship, is akin to your house being assaulted by thugs, and so you rip off the front door of your house in order to staple it to the back door. Ultimately, even if you are focusing shields on another part of the ship, then why would you not focus it on the bridge as well, since that contains every Resistance leader? It doesn't make sense, and I didn't talk about it because I thought it was nonsense, but you were right, I should have kept it in. Though, as I said, it was really hard to get everything in, and this little intro, I mean, this will give you some evidence of that. Because since we're on that note, how is it that the Radis is moving at a faster speed than the maximum speed of a Star Destroyer, yet when Leia gets blown out into space, and has a decent chunk of time time just floating around, how is it that she manages to just float right back in? How isn't it that the ship had blasted far away from her at that point? It is moving at a very high speed. Why was it stationary when she wanted to get back in? This doesn't make any sense. Though honestly, I've had so many insightful comments and I kind of want to parrot some of them here in case some of you don't know about these extra plot holes. It is established that the Millennium Falcon can actually get in and out of this chase through space, if you will, in order to drop off and pick up Rey. Now, we know the Millennium Falcon is actually pretty big and you can fit a lot of people in it. There is only, what, 400 people in the Radius? So why not ferry them out with the Millennium Falcon? You could save a hell of a lot of lives. In fact, you could save all of them, though this just compounds the horrible, horrible plot hole that if Chewie can close gaps with hyperspace to get to the Radius, then why can't the First Order do that? Speaking of hyperspace, and how this film has decided to portray its power, why is it that the Resistance can't simply have the ships that are about to run out of fuel or fall behind turn and use their hyperdrive on the First Order? This is a maneuver that they're fully aware of, and it may or may not deal significant damage. Whether or not it does, it's a definitively better shot than doing nothing and just getting blown up. Makes no sense. Additionally, when we begin the film, the ship itself has a goal of finding a new base. Fair enough. They end up just talking about it. Then they are attacked, and so Holdo devises the plan to go to Crate. Why weren't they heading to Crate in the first place? That sounds like a perfect new place for a base. There's already a fortress there. Why didn't they hyperspace right to it? Makes no sense. There was something I wanted to clarify, and it was in that part 1 I said that the magnetized bombs was actually a pretty good argument. Now, my mistake there was actually referring to it as magnetized bombs, when in reality I really just wanted to talk about magnets. I think that there is a scientist out there that could make it work with magnets. My idea, as a layman, was that you would magnetize the rails, and you would propel the bombs out and the momentum would carry them to the ship below. Because if the bombs themselves were magnetized, then yes, it would cause conflicts. So I understand why people got a bit confused, and that's just bad wording by my part. Anyway, I actually did miss that Hux found the Rebel base in The Force Awakens, and that explains how they know where the planet is at the beginning of The Last Jedi.
We have their location. We tracked their reconnaissance ship to the Elenium system.
Good.
But honestly, my problem is more to do with how it was all rushed. We don't know for sure that they are the same planets. Maybe a visual novel explains that. Also, I thought that the Resistance knew that the First Order knew where their planet was at the end of Force Awakens, because that's exactly what the Starkiller was about to fire at near the end of the film. Remember that? The main point is the film just hard opens to episode 5 instead of building it, and it fits in with the movie's obsession with action-packed emotional scenes before building them or developing any characters. That's what I tried to get across about the pieces of the board analogy, though I really did make genuine mistakes already in the other videos. I didn't realize that C-3PO gains and drops the red arm in Force Awakens, so the criticism about sales is fair, but it's not attributed to Rian Johnson in terms of forgetting it. Sorry Ryan, not everything is your fault, dude. Also, everyone is telling me that Coruscant was not blown up, and it was in fact Hosnian Prime. You would not know this from the movie, as Hosnian Prime is not a label used in the film. They only refer to the system it belonged to. Once.
I'm sorry.
Finn's familiar with the weapon that destroyed the Hosnian system. He worked on the base.
We're desperate for anything you can tell us.
For all any viewers could know, Coruscant could actually be in the Hosnian system, since that is meaningless to us as information, and the mere fact that they look so similar is almost an attempt to make people think it is Coruscant. It's almost like the world building is just horrible. On the hyperspace point, by the way, people have said that you could just make hyperspace missiles. Could you imagine that? A missile with the capabilities of nuking the Death Star. The Death Star was built by the finest military mind for weaponry after decades.
You're an inspired scientist, but you're a terrible liar.
And yet it could be thwarted by tech that apparently existed this whole time, at least according to the new lead writers. Remember, these are the same writers who said that the hyperspace move didn't change the law whatsoever. Also, I forgot to cover that the actual mask of Vader's, just like Anakin's lightsaber, is not given any kind of origin. Like, how could Kylo possibly have this, and how did Maz get the lightsaber?
Where'd you get that?
A good question. For another time.
But Vader's mask is literally dropped from the film. We can assume that Kylo has gotten over his Vader obsession and wants to strike out on his own, but we don't get a scene where he reconciles the time he spent communing with Vader. Assuming that's even what it was, Was he simply communing with Snoke and it was a trick? Who knows? We all have to write this for Ryan because he didn't put it into the film. Anyway, following from the previous video, a detail I want covered, as I somehow missed it, is that Anakin's lightsaber was torn in half when Kylo and Rey tried to force it off each other. Rey kept both pieces of it and escaped. Just something that I needed to actually be said, because it's going to come up later. It also functions as a metaphor of what the original and the prequels mean to this film, I suppose. But that's subjective, folks. You can make of that what you will. Finally, I want to comment on the whole Force creating balance thing. In George Lucas's eyes, balance meant the destruction of the Sith, but now it means that there always has to be a power that counterbalances its opposition. Strong light means there needs to be strong dark. Strong dark means there needs to be strong light. This would be something they really don't want you to think about. You know, does a new light side person just spawn the moment the dark side person kills the current light person? Are you telling me that it took the Force 30 years to have Luke rise to oppose Vader, but it also happened to require training and years to complete from the outset of him even knowing that he could be a Jedi Knight? Because that's similar to Rey, isn't it? Are you saying people as powerful as Rey pop up whenever someone like Rey dies? And the same for Kylo? Like there is a slot to be filled? This is literally the same premise as Buffy the Vampire Slayer's source of power now. And if you're really going to make this much of a big deal about the Force attempting to balance out the light and the dark, if Rey and Kylo balance each other out, then who balances for Snoke? He is clearly not neutral. And who was the balance for Palpatine in the OT? Unfortunately, it doesn't stop there. In the first 6 episodes, it is heavily implied that the dark side was the quick and easy route to power, and the light was something you had to train for, work for, and discipline for. But when we really think about what is happening in these movies, Kylo has trained for years with 2 extremely potent teachers, and yet he is still trying to find his potential despite being on the dark side. We then have Rey, who has basically done nothing to receive massive amounts of power from the light side. She hasn't had to work for anything or focus or train, and yet she is equal, if not more potent than Kylo. It's as if they've now flipped the script and torn away the meaning of the light and dark sides as paths one can choose. And of course, Rey does all of this without a single hardship. I mean, even Anakin, despite being the chosen one, falling to the dark side, failed again and again and again. There is no respect for the source material. Attempts to recontextualize the OT and prequels once again forces the film to fall flat on its face as it embarrasses itself, trying to say that it knows what was truly happening in those films when they were self-contained just fine. One of my favorite comments from the previous video, however, was a user named InDAZone, and they pointed out something extremely fundamental about the storytelling of episodes 7 to 8. Rey was very much concerned for her potential family, and the realization she has provided is quite heartbreaking for her.
Whomever you're waiting for on Jakku, they're never coming back.
Her parents are never coming back. They aren't relevant to her. She needs to look to the future now, not the past.
The belonging you seek is not behind you. It is ahead.
So why is it that Rey feels as though she has been retconned? In episode 8, she is massively concerned with her parentage, even though in episode 7 she came to terms with the fact that she won't be seeing her parents again. And so there is a thought. The dialogue, well, the script in general, is constructed in this film as though Ryan is writing as a direct response to the fans and in spite of them, as if the characters behave based on the meta surrounding the movie. Rey wasn't concerned with her parentage by the end of episode 7. The fan base was. The fan base was obsessed with it as a plot point to explain her power, and so it became a plot point in episode 8. I'm going to point out patterns later in this video, but this is one that I won't be covering because I'm just going to say it now. Ryan has created a script that doesn't focus on what the characters want in terms of answers and motivations, but what the fans want in terms of answers and motivations. Let me provide an additional example. Kylo kills his father, Han Solo, at what is essentially an attempt to gain the appeasement of Snoke, and Snoke decides that Kylo still has some training to do despite that. So he wants him to kill Rey? Snoke decided that killing Han Solo, hero to the rebel forces, Kylo's father of decades, didn't really prove anything. Snoke decided that killing Rey, Kylo's weird friend of one day, will complete his dark side training. Snoke shouldn't think that Kylo even gives the tiniest of care for Rey compared to Han, considering everything we know. This is so weird. The last test or training for the dark side is to kill a girl with no ability to fight while your master holds them down? That is so pathetic for the dark side. Why not have him fight Rey to the death? Why should Kylo killing Rey matter to Snoke anyway? Because I can tell you who it actually matters to, rather than Snoke. It's the fans. or the fan fiction writer, the script is focusing on what the fans think should matter rather than what genuinely happens in this story. The characters actually seem to care about the meta. Not only is this a bad focus in terms of trying to write your characters, but Ryan does indeed decide to do nothing with these things as well. But yes, now that we're through that, let's get on with the plot. Now, like I said, everyone's heading to Crate, so we cut to the planet Crate. Apparently every transport ship has landed and the Resistance has prepared a full defense of the area. This happens immediately. There are no establishing scenes for it. As I said in the last part, this ending is incredibly rushed. It simply begins with Leia saying the First Order is coming. It is as though we have just started a new film entirely, in fact. It is a clone of Episode 5, again. Remember Episode 5, guys? The setup, that is once again not earned at all, is the Resistance sits at about 100 or less people. They are holed up in an old rebel fortress, and the First Order is about to assault it with a series of walkers. At present, the Resistance is trying to close the doors because they hadn't done that already, despite being chased ferociously by the First Order, and a singular enemy ship manages to make it through despite many of them trying. The Resistance, including General Leia herself, actually open fire on this singular ship with their blasters. This is such a tiny, yet hilarious moment. There are no enemy soldiers, as they would be exiting through a little ramp if they were actually there, and the blaster fire cannot melt steel transports. So what do they hope to achieve here? They're just splashing the ship with blaster shots for absolutely no reason. Is it to make the audience feel as though something is happening? Neither Poe nor Leia would ever do this. It doesn't make sense. They would wait to see what happens. If they saw stormtroopers come out of the ship, they would then open fire. We then see hands pop up from the ship itself. We discover that it is in fact Finn, Rose, and BB-8. It was the ship they boarded and left on just after killing Phasma, and they were the only ones to make it into this base alive from the First Order fleet. You see, writing is wonderful when you can be this convenient. Now all of our heroes are in the exact same place and prepared for a hostile battle on Crate. Well, no, they haven't explained that Rey is here yet. I'm sure she's somewhere else because she's not going to conveniently end up here as well, right? Anyway, Poe says that their shields are up, so they cannot be bombarded from orbit. This is obviously setting up the assault from the ground, which begins just a moment after he mentions it with the sounds of crafts dropping to the surface. This is just another example of a throwaway line explaining a potential plot hole. Why wouldn't the First Order nuke the planet with assault cannons? Because they have shields up. This is fine, by the way. I'm absolutely okay with it. It's simply a strong highlight that Rian Johnson knows how to use exposition. Unfortunately, when it comes to many other aspects of the story, he simply forgets to use it. The First Order, within seconds of seeing the planet, have dropped an army of walkers and a cannon. The guerrilla walkers are essentially just AT-ATs, and that's fine in terms of design. It just seems lucky and convenient that they not only have these on board the Supremacy, but that they drop them so insanely fast with no connecting scenes to explain it. This may not have been an issue except for the fact that we have a fleet of Star Destroyers that have been obliterated and the Supremacy is in 2 pieces. Looks like we have yet another gap in the plot, and that's quite a major one. Also, we have the same poaching problem here. In Episode 5, the Empire knew they were heading to Hoth and the walkers were perfect for the terrain. Here though, they just have them. Like, is that guerrilla walker just standard? Does it have anything to do with the difficult terrain? Because this planet's terrain is actually a clean sheet. It's not even cold, but we'll get to that. Finn comments on the cannon saying it's miniaturized Death Star tech and it'll crack the door open like an egg, the door that no other weaponry can apparently crack. Firstly, what a coincidence that they have this weapon. It's perfect for the situation. This also raises an important question. Why, Ryan, is this kind of tech not on the First Order's starships? Especially if it's the most powerful weapon they have. Ryan, please. The characters then decide if they're going to utilize fight or flight. BB-8 then immediately enters the scene and C-3PO translates the droid. Apparently, BB-8 has analyzed the schematic for the entire mine and there is only one way in or out. Through the door, so they have no choice but to stop the cannon. Finn then makes a small speech about saving the Resistance and biding time until help comes, as the help will eventually come since people believe in Leia. I think this is definitive evidence that the speech the Codebreaker gave Finn about morality meant nothing, really. Finn is not going to grow from it in any way. He's not skeptical of the Resistance or the cause. In fact, he seems to feel the opposite to that, despite being explained that there's bad on both sides. Which means the theme of morality that was explored through the idea of a war machine truly was for the audience. A cheap few minutes to throw it out and move right along, so that people could write essays about the depth that that very concept offers. There are some crystal foxes, by the way. They don't really do anything, but they look pretty, I suppose. Obviously, they will make extremely cool toys, too. The shot then turns to Rose and shows her smiling, which is obviously a character moment for Finn. He is fighting the enemy head-on now instead of running, but I am not clear on what experience brought him here. Learning about moral ambiguity doesn't equal bravery in the face of death. Learning about defenseless animals, slave children, and evil rich people thanks to arms sales doesn't equal bravery in the face of death. Being betrayed by a mercenary doesn't exactly mean bravery in the face of death. Performing one of the most dangerous espionage missions ever seen in the saga in aid of the Resistance is bravery, meaning that from Rose's perspective, this doesn't make any sense. He never lacked any bravery, nor did it get reinvigorated. So this isn't an arc, this is just Finn proving to Rose that apparently he's not a coward, which was something she should have figured out already. But why would it be something we care about? We barely know why these two even connect. What we should have seen was Finn realizing what happens when people don't fight, and why fighting is important. If anything, the scenes in Canto Bight about the war machine should have convinced him to run from the organizations that blow each other up. This arc of Finn's is simple. He wants to run, and then he doesn't run. It's just like The Force Awakens. I think I see where they were going with it, to basically make him disenfranchised from the First Order, only to basically flip the coin and then be fully indoctrinated by the Resistance. But the building blocks are either out of place or irrespective of each other, since he was weaselly in his opening scenes, but that's dropped the moment he goes on a secret mission that is incredibly dangerous. They have Rose remind us that Finn is cowardly, but we know better than to believe that. We know his character better than she does, so it just feels off. We then cut to the Resistance preparing an identical defense of Crate as the Rebels did for Hoth in Episode 5, and since we are so close to direct plagiarism, they have a character taste the ground and declare that we aren't on a snow planet, it's a salt planet. If this was in any other movie, it would be massively criticized by everybody, but because it's in a Star Wars film nearly 40 years later, it is considered an endearing and referential moment in a skilled or clever way, rather than the ideas of a hack. Also, a salt planet? Seriously? This reminds me of a child saying something like, there's this planet, it's made of jelly, and this one, it's made of cheese. Lava, ice, tropics, forest, desert, rain, and ocean planets are elemental. Salt is just salt. Please try and be a little bit more creative. Not to mention that some guy deciding to taste the ground is so strange. Like, you end up on this new and amazing planet, so you turn to your fellow soldier and say, hey Steve, mind tasting the ground to see what world we loaded into? We then see that Finn, Rose, and Poe, with a handful of random Resistance members, are making their way towards the walkers in these strange new ships. Finn is somehow piloting one of them, despite the previous film making it clear that he cannot pilot a ship. But since I pointed that out in part 1, all I can really say is we must assume he learned how to pilot while being in a coma. Continuity used to be a thing. Anyway, we have to ask ourselves, why are the writers forcing Finn to be in this situation? The reason this is happening is that Finn is supposed to have an important moment soon, and so we need to forget about his inability to pilot. That's only going to get in the way, and we of course know that the best stories ignore rules for emotional scenes. That's what good writing is, correct? Hux then says there are a total of 13 speeders, and Kylo demands that they push right through them to the wall. These speeders have very little defense and are limited in terms of offenses. As a result, they begin to be picked off by the First Order with ease. I, like many at this point, was wondering just what the point of all of this was. What is the plan here? You can't possibly hope to take down an AT-AT, let alone these new models, by crashing a speeder into it. That would mean you're dead anyway, so what is happening here? Poe says how long we gotta hold them till they pull up that cannon, in a sort of sarcastic and frustrated way. So I guess the speeders are meant to distract the guerrillas until they pull up the cannon, since the speeders don't actually damage anything, so why not wait to release the speeders once the cannon is actually on its way? Since now you're just driving in circles waiting for the cannon to come towards you, while getting sniped by the walkers and the TIE fighters. Like, this scene gets really stupid when you realize that they've sent all of these speeders out to simply die unless the cannon actually shows up in time. All the First Order has to do now is stop pulling the cannon. Then they can destroy the speeders in terms of however long that takes, then continue pulling the cannon, and continue firing. This scene makes no sense. We then see Rose is in imminent danger, and moments before she is killed by 3 TIE fighters, the Millennium Falcon saves her life. It is driven by Chewbacca while he is playing with the Porgs, and the gunner is none other than Rey herself, who has successfully left Snoke's ship, made it back to Chewie, and is saving the lives of the rest of the heroes. Again. This without a single scene to establish it. She's just here now. Get over it. This moment is almost exactly the same as A New Hope. Do you remember when 3 ships were chasing Luke? Only in A New Hope we had Han Solo, a selfish scoundrel whose roguish charm won over the people that he would eventually consider abandoning. But after seeing the plight of the people he had suffered with, as well as the cause he had come to understand, he pulled through and saved the life of the man who went on to destroy the most powerful galaxy-gripping weapon the Empire had. One of the most classic arcs used to explain how characters learn and grow on screen. While here we have Rey saving them because that's all Rey does. She's perfect, and she's doing it because it was in A New Hope. Not to mention that Rey has never used a gunner before, or certainly not the Millennium Falcon gunner, and on her very first shot from the gunner on the ship itself, she gets a triple kill. 3 TIE fighters in 1 shot. She is better at this than any pilot we have seen previously, despite having absolutely no experience. No. She's not a Mary Sue. That's ridiculous. She also tells Chewie exactly what to do and where to go throughout the scene as well. She criticizes him for not driving well enough at one point in the cabins because, again, she has poached his piloting abilities and piloting knowledge for herself, despite his decades of history with the ship. Then, despite the established rule set of these speeders, Kylo and Hux command every single TIE fighter to pursue the Millennium Falcon, and since that ship is literally immune to destruction, they all perish while trying to shoot at it. This is so monumentally stupid and convenient that it makes complete sense that it takes place in this film. The cavern they go through to escape the TIE fighters is obviously a retread of the Death Star run in Episode 6, by the way. I wanted to point that out in case these references weren't clear for you. Anyway, back to the actual battleground where Kylo has forgotten something. May I remind you, the only threat to the cannon is one of those ships shooting it or plowing directly into it, and instead of making sure that each of the 13 are destroyed before reaching the cannon, Kylo sends his forces away. This makes no sense, but it allows the next scene to take place, so it's great. The only argument I've heard about this is that Kylo hates the Millennium Falcon to the point where he forgets anything is happening around him and demands its destruction. The way it goes is that Kylo is such an angsty, angry psycho that he makes bad decisions that are focused on the destruction of his enemies, but that doesn't actually explain this scene. If Kylo was hell-bent on destroying what remains of his enemies, then he should be focusing entirely on the cannon. It is the key to ending the resistance. By sending every fighter to the Falcon, which just so happens to be roughly 8 when it should be hundreds of thousands, Kylo is ruining his own chances of completing the only goal he has. Ultimately, this wouldn't be a problem if not for the fact that these guerrilla walkers have decided to stop shooting. Rewatch this film, pay attention to this scene. They no longer shoot, they just stop. You should also realize that something is very wrong when your only defense of a terrible plot rescuing action is that a character is being stupid. Like I said in the previous parts, this is akin to having a child or someone who is mentally deficient, and that's a cop-out to have a scene that you want. Not to mention, by the way, that Kylo went from saying that everything needs to end, there needs to be a new power, a new faction, and that he and Rey could lead it, to just being the replacement for Snoke. So now we have Ryan ruining the characters George and his team created in the OT. Then we have him ruining what characters JJ created in The Force Awakens, and now he is actively ruining his own work. Did you believe me when I said this script was hemorrhaging? Then we have some clunky exposition. Poe says, "She drew them off, all of them," and Finn shouts, "Whoa, they hate that ship." These are extremely cartoonish lines, spoken as if the writer is saying to the audience, "Look, now they're safe, and it makes sense, okay? It does. Stop asking questions. Kylo doesn't like the Millennium Falcon. Neither does Hux. So their ridiculously stupid decisions make sense, okay?" That is a-okay, Ryan. I totally believe the scene. Thank you. Finn then says that the cannon is charging and the only chance is to go right down its throat, like Independence Day. And so the tension rises because the characters remembered that they have an army of AT-ATs standing there in the battlefield. Remember I commented about this? Well, they start shooting again now. This whole time, they've just been sitting there. But thank God some of the writers actually remembered they exist. Is it worth even saying the word continuity anymore? The Resistance then loses every single ship except the ones piloted by Poe, Finn, and Rose. Do I need to say the phrase plot armor? Probably not. Poe, upon seeing several of his comrades die, decides that the mission is already lost. The cannon is charged and the only result is a suicide run. This is considered an arc by many people. However, once again, like Finn, it does not add up. Poe saw that the girl in the original fight in the film died in order to destroy the dreadnought and thus save lives. Poe considered this a worthy sacrifice, as it turned out it was more than just that because of the tracker that the First Order had in place. His decision to push the destruction of the superweapon proved to be the right choice then as it was in The Force Awakens. There is nothing to learn from those experiences. All that happened was two of his superiors told him he is reckless, despite saving everyone's lives twice. Now he's faced with that same choice again, and he's backing out? This cannon will end the Resistance, and you want to pull out to save a member of the Resistance. You learned this lesson by being lied to and abused by your commanders for not blindly following them. This arc is absolute nonsense, and the people who want to talk about its merits look back at the facts with a completely different view of what happened. That Poe was impetuous and got people killed, which has led him to this choice, while in reality he has been the only character I can relate to, as he makes continuously logical calls even though he's under extreme pressure to perform. So he decides to call it and pull back from the fight. Finn is shown to be at max speed, straight shotting, while the other speeders pull away, and he has a genuine character moment here. John Boyega is shown to even tear up as he says he can't let the First Order win, and pulls off his headset to ignore his team. His time as a self-concerned survivalist is over. His time defending only himself and Rey is over. He now wants to fight for a cause, against the First Order and for his friends. I don't think they performed the development properly in this film whatsoever for him, but the concept is still appreciated as an arc, and I had some investment in this scene as I kinda like Finn, honestly. They have a wide shot to show that he is the only speeder heading towards the cannon, and it won't be long before impact. The music rises, the choir echoes, the ship begins to melt under the pressure as he aims a straight shot to the cannon, and jarringly, the moment is cut short by Rose clanking into him from the side, rescuing him before he can make his move, resulting in the destruction of the wall protecting the base. There is so much wrong with this scene, I hope you can actually keep up with me. How didn't Finn get hit by 10 different walkers while he was the only speeder heading directly towards the cannon on a white battlefield, when every other person was sniped with ease and the First Order knew that these speeders are the only threat to the cannon that remains? How didn't Rose get hit considering she managed to make it to the front line as well? How, logistically, did Rose manage to not only get ahead of Finn, but do it in a way that provided her enough time to make a 90-degree turn and knock Finn to safety before he made it to the cannon? How did Rose know she wouldn't kill both of them by performing this move, especially when Finn's ship was extremely weak thanks to the laser? Why in the world would Rose do this? Why did she prevent the saving of the Resistance that her sister died to protect? Why is any of this happening? This doesn't have any form of consistency whatsoever. It's a huge joke. It is brought up by the majority of critics, as well as all of the people who actually love the film. They usually say this is the worst scene in the film, but it's not over yet. Finn, unhurt from this entire ordeal, demands to know why Rose stopped him, and she replies with potentially the worst line of the entire saga of Star Wars.
I don't like sand.
No, it's worse than that by a long shot. Rose says, "I saved you. That's how we're gonna win. Not fighting what we hate, saving what we love." Where do I begin with this? The Resistance has made it clear that they are in a position that means this wall protecting them is all that's preventing their deaths. So they sent out speeders to try and disable the cannon, as with that thing being active, the Resistance will be obliterated. Poe demands a retreat because he doesn't believe it's possible without dying, but Finn is happy to make that sacrifice as he cares more about the cause in general than he ever has before. Again, this is a weird decision for both Poe and Finn in terms of their character development, but ignoring that, it is the current best choice for the survival of the Resistance. He will die to save the cause, the people, and the spark, as they are so lovingly referred to. But Rose stops him, citing that he was making the wrong call and saving what we love is the better choice. But that is exactly what he was doing, saving the cause he has come to love. This is exactly what Admiral Holdo did. She died blowing up a huge portion of the enemy fleet and thus protecting what she loves. This is exactly what Rose's sister did. She died blowing up the dreadnought before it could destroy the cruiser, the thing that she loves because her sister was on it. Is Rose aware of what film she is in? Did they provide the actress a copy of the script? The poetry of this is beyond. She says all of this as the wall in the background is being blown open, exposing the resistance to annihilation. I can't imagine them filming her lines and this shot without laughing, to be perfectly honest. It makes anti-sense. Like, there is no lore or fan theory that explains this one. It's just blatant incompetence. And when people respond to this by saying, don't take the film so seriously, are they referring to no actual engagement whatsoever? Just sit there, brain in hand, and admire the colors or the explosions and the cute animals? Because this is absolutely ridiculous. How does a functioning human watch this scene and not become insulted for the film expecting them to accept it as an endearing or even remotely insightful moment? Rose then kisses Finn, and it is a strong signal for the audience to wince, since they haven't made Rose and Finn connect in that way for a single scene in the film. Not to mention that their chemistry is that of distant friends at best, considering that Rose has made very strong criticisms of Finn throughout the film. The romance may have actually been a rushed decision as well, and considering the audience reaction online, I doubt they'll pull this through to episode 9. I imagine JJ will practically have Rose stay in the coma for the rest of the saga, since she was as big of a waste of time as Canto Bight. And she took time away from the characters that we were developing already. What a pointless character. She is then made unconscious, and so the film continues. Though it is really curious that Finn and Rose have not been shot yet, since they're standing several meters away from the guerrilla walkers, and the film makes a point to show us this. But never mind. Kylo then says, General Hux, advance. No quarter, no prisoners. I know I've mentioned it before, but this seriously frustrated me. The progression made with Kylo, however poorly constructed, has now been completely rolled back. He wanted to be a sole force in the galaxy, a man whose goals were his own. And now he's just back at the helm of the First Order, commanding the deaths of innocents. Again. He's really come a long way, hasn't he? It is then pointed out that each of the Resistance sympathetic people across the galaxy were contacted. They've heard the message, but they are declining to help. Leia says they fought to the end and they did their best in a very defeated attitude. The spark is out. This is a scene of respect and reverence of what the Resistance was, as it has now reached its conclusion, but I find it very difficult to get to that point considering that we have barely seen them in action, and the First Order has simply crushed them without a sense of them ever being that impressive. This is a world-building problem again. The writers are saying the Resistance are now pretty much dead without much of a sense of what they were, and the audience is left to respond with, oh, well, that sucks, I think. Even though we are fully aware that JJ will invent a brand new army in the third film because we have to have more struggles in space. Otherwise it wouldn't be Star Wars. Luke then enters the room, and to the relief of the audience we finally get a second small scene that we can actually enjoy, being fans of the original trilogy. At least they utilize the characters in some way. There is a little bit of humor and love shared between Mark Hamill and Carrie Fisher as they channel their characters. Luke says he's here to face Kylo, and he says he can't save him. Leia says that her son is gone, and this might be a result of the bridge being destroyed. Maybe Leia still thinks her son fired the missile, but we don't find out. Either way, Luke says that no one is ever truly gone, which I'm sure is what many of the OT fans, including myself, are telling themselves about Luke's character. Anyway, he gives Leia the dice from the Falcon and moves on. C-3PO and Leia both give Luke an interesting look of surprise during this scene, and Luke moves to the battlefield. Luke then gets fired upon by an entire army of walkers, completely shattering the ground around him. Luke then makes a gesture, like, "That's all you got, loser?" The kind of thing you would expect if you could see the people playing against you on Xbox Live, but Rian Johnson felt it would suit Luke now, despite the character he is in the film being the complete opposite of this. Just another tonally aborted joke.
He's Jake Skywalker. He's not my Luke Skywalker.
Anyway, Kylo says he's going to meet Luke on the battlefield, and for everyone to stay away until he is finished. Hux complains about that and is promptly thrown across the room, and we have a moment of a stormtrooper realizing what just happened and conforming immediately, which I find funny because it's essentially the same scene as The Force Awakens. It gives the stormtroopers more character, almost like they are real people, which was the opportunity with Finn, but the idea of interesting people within the stormtroopers has all but been entirely forgotten. Could anyone really watch The Last Jedi and infer that Finn was a stormtrooper? I can't remember if there's a single reference to it other than the fact that he mopped the breaker room. Rian Johnson poorly handling a character, you say? Ridiculous. We are then shown that Finn has dragged Rose's body all the way from the walkers to the Resistance without any repercussions whatsoever. This is literally not possible. The ground where they were was white, and to drag a body that distance would be insanity. It leaves a big red trail behind you as well. Their destination is so far away. Do you remember how long it took them in their speeders to get from one side to the other? But the writers clearly just wanted to teleport Finn and Rose back to safety now that they have completed their arcs. Some people speculate that they must have used a trench, which if you look at the battlefield, there is not a trench in sight that would get them from the front line of walkers to the base. Besides, stop writing the script for them, it's really annoying me. Kylo then says, "Have you come back to forgive me, to save my soul?" And Luke simply replies, "No." He just says no.
I thought I was a nice, nurturing, in my mind, I was a great uncle to Ben Solo, and I feel tremendous guilt that I wasn't there for him.
No, Mark, you would be horrible to your nephew, as is your new character.
Can I just say, though, a lot of times I would say to Ryan, we got to think about the fans. And he said, no, we got to think about the story, and we got to think about our movie. Which
having grown up as a Star Wars fan for myself for my entire life, and having been on the other side of that curtain for the majority of my life, I know...
Poe then decides that Luke must be doing this in order to give the Resistance time to escape in the mines, despite earlier saying there was absolutely no way out from the droids, who scanned schematics. But then the same droid says that there is now actually a chance of an opening. He didn't mention this before because Ryan wanted the tension of the speeder scene, but now that that scene is over, he needs to get the Resistance out of the mines, so this is a thing now. Like, these are the kind of writing issues you first learn about when you're becoming a writer. I cannot believe he got away with this in the movie, it's ridiculous. More importantly, I suppose, is that Poe has opted out of a fight and instead decided to run, which I guess is his character now, despite every choice to fight made in this film by Poe being essentially the best one when you really think about the situation. Poe is probably the only character who is mostly undamaged by this film, and yet he is vilified by many characters for it. Poe still operates in a way that we expect. He's just criticized all the time for having the right perspective. He then figures they should follow the crystallized fox things until they find an opening that they must have gone through, and discovers that the hole is far too small for any of them to fit through. Though I don't know why this is a problem. Leia can simply move the stones. She is an established Force user, and she has a strong understanding of it apparently. Like, the people who defend this film say she was trained or whatever, even though that's not supported by the visual novels, and it's actually not supported by Rian Johnson either. But they have to be consistent. Come on, Leia. She just needs someone in the background to try and encourage her, I guess.
Do it.
Rey then gets to the other side and comments on this problem as a sigh, and then says, "Lifting rocks," as if she will even have a lick of trouble from lifting that huge expanse of rock. It is going to be absolutely fine. She's even joking about it. Luke and Kylo then begin their battle, and there is an extremely misplaced Matrix move thrown in the fight, which begs the question once again of how do people think these battles are superior to the ones in the prequels? If you hate the ones in the prequels because of the dancing aspect, then you should hate these ones. After that, Luke says, "I failed you, Ben. I'm sorry." To which Kylo responds, "I'm sure you are. The Resistance is dead. The war is over, and when I kill you, I will have killed the Last Jedi."
The only way for me to solve this crisis is to be Superman 4, The Quest for Peace.
Oh, that's why they call it that.
Aside from that, I find it interesting that Kylo is now referring to them as the Resistance again. Good to get that back on track, Ryan. Luke then says, "Every word of what you just said is wrong." And I have to wonder here, when Luke says you are wrong about everything you've just said, is he also referring to the recognition of Luke's apology? It makes this line very clunky, but it's a great soundbite, and many have used it on my previous Star Wars videos comment section, so there's that, I guess. Luke then says, "The rebellion is reborn today. The war is just beginning, and I will not be the Last Jedi." So first of all, they are interchanging the Resistance and the Rebellion again, but I suppose it doesn't matter at this point because Luke is saying that they are one and the same. We all knew that, but it was the films that seemed to be in disbelief about it. I guess the film has a character arc too. Nice work, Ryan. He says the war is just beginning, which is an empty line as the war never seems to end in these films, does it? The best we get is a sort of peace in the off-season. We never see the peace, but it exists. And finally, he says that he will not be the Last Jedi, which we already knew since he trained a bunch of people and some left with Kylo and they're not with him now, so who knows which of them are alive or which of them are Jedi. Not to mention that there is a whole universe of Force-sensitive people out there, with the Jedi culture still being relevant in certain corners of it. Basically, this line is only there to sound dramatic, but again, you guys already knew that. It is crazy to think about the idea that Luke lost all of his students to the dark side, including his nephew, or they got killed, and then he gave rise to the most powerful dark side user we have ever seen to simply run away to an island. As you folks can see, I still can't quite get over what they did to Luke. Anyway, we then see Rey, who is now lifting every one of those rocks that when put together likely weigh more than an X-Wing. She does this with the most bored and easygoing expression on her face because again, she doesn't experience hardship. She has no idea what that is. And that's a part of her character, by the way. Her arc is to actually get bored of being powerful. Fascinating. Kylo then says he will kill Rey as well, and Luke responds, "Strike me down in anger and I will always be with you, just like your father." Which is a nice line. It's a reference to the original fight with Obi-Wan, but refitting it for a loved one rather than an enemy. There's honestly some nice things in this film. It's like 5%, but there's some stuff there. Kylo then strikes at Luke and his saber goes through him with no visible damage to speak of. It turns out Luke is channeling an apparition of himself from the island he was in originally, and the clues for this were that Luke did not leave a footprint on the ground, as well as him looking very well groomed. Leia and C-3PO likely knew he wasn't there as well. But the real baffling moment of all of this is that Kylo couldn't tell he wasn't there. Luke is using a Force technique which a Force user would likely be able to detect. But no, he looks exactly the same as when Kylo last saw him. But no, he's using a lightsaber that Kylo broke not 10 minutes ago. But no, this lightsaber is something that he's wanted for as long as we've known him. But no. Finally, Poe could tell it was a diversion, but Kylo couldn't. No. Why wouldn't Luke use his green lightsaber as seen in his memories with Kylo? What a strange and ill-suiting choice. We then see Rey and Leia can feel something is wrong, and we cut back to Luke on the island who gives a worrying glance at his chest, implying that he might have been injured by Kylo's slash. It was set up that things can move across the universe way back with Kylo and the Rain, even with the ghost connections. I bring this up in a very forced manner because I have no idea why they had this shot in the film if not for this reason. Like, the whole Rain realization that Kylo has leads nowhere, so this is what we're supposed to think, I guess? Regardless, Luke managed to fool Kylo and rescue the Resistance while referencing his own teacher's death, and leaving with a line that almost channeled Han Solo. "See you around, kid." This was a small reprieve for the people who respect Luke's character. He was finally making a difference and he was protecting those he loves. It's an okay start, and hopefully we can see him climb back to his former dignity in the coming— No, he's dead. Literally killed because of the strain of performing the task of projection. Ryan butchered his character and then has prevented him from being able to now fix it in any way, shape, or form. Luke's handling in this film is honestly a horror story for so many fans, and this finish is why. He cannot redeem himself anymore. He fades away into the Force while staring at the binary sunset, which reminds me of so many elements in this film. Gorgeous, creative, doesn't make any sense. Why are you killing the character? Why he didn't just go to the planet himself is beyond me, as he has the Force connection to Leia, knowing what kind of trouble they were in, as well as an X-Wing. But he used a ghost instead, which one would assume means he would at least prevent his own death by doing so. But he still died. It's hard to believe, but that's all we get, not just in the story, but in reference to his character as a whole. He spent the film being a coward only to force project himself across the world and then perish. There are many arguments in response to this, so let's explore them. This was a fantastic arc for Luke. It made sense and it allowed us to see a side to Luke that we would otherwise have been without. To end his arc. It's fantastic. This is fine, but I've already said this is not Luke Skywalker. And what does that mean exactly? Well, when you assess the characters from the OT and you give a selection of words to describe them, those words cannot describe this new character. This is how characters work. They are defined by their traits, their descriptors. I mean, this would still be possible as there are characters at the beginning of television shows that are almost polar opposites by the end, and it can be fantastic storytelling because we see them struggle and grow. But we didn't see how Luke got here. We don't even understand it. We have nothing to grip to, and even if we did, this is not a direction that explores much of anything about him as a character. He is disheveled and defeated only to be heroic, sort of, and then dies. I think it really comes down to the scene where we see Luke maniacally attempting to murder his own sister's son, someone he should be nurturing and protective of. It is so hard to help people understand when they sit on the other side of the fence. They will make many arguments for it like this. Luke made a mistake in thinking about killing Ben. It was a rash, momentary decision that he realizes was wrong. Kylo's potential future scared him and he faltered for a moment. He showed weakness, and you know what? That makes him an even better character. Indiana Jones would never beg for mercy or cry during a fist fight. Ellen Ripley would never leave people she loves to die in order to save herself. Harry Potter would never sell his friends and his children for money. Jack Sparrow would never sober up and work out the best political route to help the people in his area. And Luke Skywalker wouldn't attempt to murder his own apprentice, his nephew, his sister and best friend's son while he slept. Luke valued his family more than anything. It's a part of what defines him as a character. This is what Star Wars was about, and to see him this way is heartbreaking. Vader was a mass-murdering monster who acted as the fist that destroyed the Jedi and the Republic. He couldn't be topped in terms of a source of pure evil, and yet Luke saved him because he was his father. But he couldn't even be bothered to try and save this innocent little boy who was not only a blood relative but his own student. Many people blame The Force Awakens for all of this, and that is a deflection. There were things you could do to work with the ending JJ provided. Hell, just give me a spin-off movie to write, Disney. I'll fix it all for you. We could crowdsource ideas to get your property back on track. At this point, I'm trying to help you make money. But yes, many people will say that Luke is fictional and he can become whatever he is written to be, and they are absolutely right, but you still have to put in the work to understand the history of the character and his motivations. Not to mention, you need to bridge the gap between himself now and 30 years plus ago. For those who don't understand, the biggest takeaway for so many fans of the original trilogy was not that they connected to the name Luke Skywalker, it was the person, the man himself, and this film wanted to take that away, take away what made the heart connect directly to the writing itself. What a shame. Kylo then enters the base with snowtroopers. Wait, snowtroopers? The planet isn't even cold. Everyone is wearing casual clothing. Even Rey, the girl who is used to hot climates, so it must be fairly mild. Are these troopers wearing protective gear for the salt? Are these salt troopers? What is happening? Just sell the toys, guys. Please, just sell the toys for the love of God. We then see Rey close the door on Kylo, potentially severing their connection. He then finds dice from the Millennium Falcon, which fades into nothing like Luke did. It's just weird that it did it separately from Luke. Poe then meets Rey for the first time, apparently, and Finn sees the Jedi books are safely secured in the drawer on the Falcon. Finn makes sure that Rose is okay, and Leia comforts Rey. Rey says that Luke may be gone, but he left in peace and purpose. I would like to remind the writers that just because you say Luke left with peace and purpose does not make it true. Leia then says they have everything they need to build a brand new rebellion, despite proving earlier that they have no reliable allies. They also have no ships aside from the Millennium Falcon, no vehicles, men, money, power, or goals other than to topple the First Order somehow. Honestly, why would anyone join the Resistance? They are about 20 people and a small ship. I would understand people joining when they strike at the heart of the Empire and succeed. But now of all times, when they've been reduced to almost nothing, and the First Order still has massive power? What's that? Nothing making sense? What a conclusion. Aside from that, it is sad to refer to the startup of the horrors of war once again, a reset of 30 plus years, as a fun and exciting thing. You would think there would be more grief considering the events of this movie. So many people have died, but we have to get right back into Space Wars, don't we? No time to absorb the events, no time to grow with these characters. We close on children telling stories of Luke Skywalker standing up to the First Order and showing that these children are Force sensitive as one uses the Force to pick up his broom. This is probably in reference to anyone all over the world now being able to simply have the Force and be powerful with it. And Luke's apparent sacrifice was somehow told to other members of the galaxy, despite there only being about 20 people on the Falcon who didn't even witness what Luke did. Are you telling me that the First Order have spread stories of Luke's heroic sacrifice of disappearing after he tricked Kylo? Why is that an inspiring story anyway? Like, can you imagine someone trying to tell this story from the perspective of any of the members of the First Order? Hey Frank, what happened? Well, it's a weird thing, you know. Some guy in robes, he like came out of the big hole that we blew open. And Kylo went down to fight him, and they sort of had a back and forth, and then the guy in the robes disappeared. I don't have any idea what happened. Yeah, that's an inspiring story. Regardless, this will apparently inspire a new generation to potentially join the rebellion, because reasons. And the film is then over. What a horrifying disaster. We had Rey go from being this new powerful Force user who's going to meet a legendary Jedi Knight. We now have this powerful Force user who turns out was only hindered by both Kylo and Luke, and now understands that she's going to dominate in the next film when she rescues the galaxy. We had Finn, a defecting stormtrooper with no cause worth fighting until he met Rey and was crippled trying to defend her. We now have Finn, who wastes 2 hours of screen time hanging out with a new friend we've never met, only to receive an extremely weird kiss from her at the end while seeing Rey for about 30 seconds in total. We had Poe, a hotshot pilot who blew us away on screen with his charisma, intelligence, and talent. We now have Poe, an overly aggressive, narrow-minded fool who learns not to be out of order. We had Kylo, a confused, lonely, angry, Darth Vader-obsessed psychopath who wants power and a reason to become who he feels he should be. We now have Kylo, a sometimes gentle, caring soul who wants to rid the world of the false dichotomy and move on to a new and interesting world with no overarching figure to tell him or the people he respects what to do. Oh no, sorry, we just have the same old Kylo we always had. What am I talking about? We had Snoke, a mysterious dark power in the universe who took care of himself and waited for the best times to strike. We now have Snoke, a gold slippers and gown wearing self-obsessed cartoon villain who dies because he was a fool. We had Luke, a man who saved his family and his friends from tyranny, a hero at the very core, a beloved icon who pushed the galaxy towards freedom and happiness. We now have Luke, a sad old toad who wanted the death of his family in order to feel satisfied that he was in charge only to run away when he failed and hoped to die, with a minor redemption at the end showing that there was just a sparkle of his actual character left. Ryan, what have you done? No character that was given any kind of focus escaped this insane need to run them into the ground. When you try and give your characters a low point in the trilogy, that doesn't mean you start to write them in ways that betrays their foundations. Character is literally the foundation of Star Wars. Without that, the films are hollow space adventures. The crazy powers, the environments, the tools, the tech, none of it matters compared. It's all dressing. Character was the most important, and you've literally sapped the core out of them all, almost surgically. The film is such a major collection of horrible writing in so many different ways that people have to rise to an insane level to defend it. We can't talk about the actual events that take place or what the characters do. It has to be recontextualized into a theme so that the film raises itself to a masterpiece in art form. Nearly every argument for the quality of this film ignores the mechanics of the writing and simply spills the word theme all over the internet. So before jumping into patterns or conclusions, how about we look at themes and the social commentary? The social aspects to this film have royally annoyed many people in the world, and this film has earned a title of being very left-leaning. I do not like to get political on my channel ever, but this film has very much pushed an agenda, so let's tackle these ideas individually and neutrally. There is a strong theme against capitalism. Nobody will deny that. In Canto Bight, we're dealing with rich people laughing while poor people suffer, and the reason is trade on very immoral markets. This is very blunt and poorly handled, as it doesn't even remotely make sense within the universe, and it's covered extremely briefly. Anti-capitalism is a rising perspective as time goes on, so it does feel as though it is pandering rather than exploring a meaningful idea about the system itself and the problems that comes with it. Though I would personally say that this is extremely inappropriate as content to try and brush over during a Star Wars film. And let's just ignore the fact that Disney are using a property they bought for millions and have sold again and again for billions to teach us about how bad capitalism is. How ridiculous. Next would be that animal cruelty is bad, and this may be an attempt to make capitalists look even worse, but I would provide the movie with the benefit of the doubt and assume they are simply saying it is bad in general. This is pretty much cartoonish, as I've already stated. It is mostly rushed and doesn't take a lick of reality into account of what will happen to these animals if they are saved. There isn't anything clever being done here. It is very simple. The animal is cute, and now it is free. Then we have slavery is bad, which law agrees with in most first world countries. It's not made to be something that's right in your face, but I think it's more of a subset of the criticisms of capitalism, which again isn't very clever in terms of a route to go to. Just showing us children suffering and then blaming these evil rich men seems very agenda driven, and I find myself asking what the point of all of this is.
Oh, it's got heart. Yes, it's got laser battles. It's got a timely message of interstellar poverty.
I know there are evil men and women in real life. You know, there are evil people in real life. I came to the science fantasy movie to watch fictional characters deal with fictional problems set up in a world of rules, instead of being handed this very quick understanding of bad things in the world that has no relevance once they leave Canto Bight. So the social aspects to it genuinely seem forced, and they also pander to a more left-leaning audience. I am sure that people on the left would agree with this even if they consider the message correct, which is not actually something I am discussing here. I am simply pointing out that the film is clearly left-leaning, which is frustrating for everybody who enjoys Star Wars and does not lean left. Well then, onto the themes. The most common discussions I could find on this were the themes of failure, communication, greed, development, redemption, and morality. Failure is indeed throughout the movie, as well as the word being spread around. Each character has at least some form of failure. Finn fails to stop the tracker, Poe fails to understand the plan, Rey fails to see the truth about Kylo, Luke fails to train Kylo correctly, Kylo fails to see the truth about Rey, Snoke fails to see Kylo's true intentions, Hux fails as a commanding officer, Holdo fails to reassure her crew, etc. So many failings all around, and that's right. Right? Well, neither I nor the person who comes up with these lists are finished. They will tell you that this elevates the film by spotting this pattern. You have now revealed the genius of the writing. It made you consider failure and how it teaches us to progress. As Yoda says, the best teacher failure is. What do I say to this? Well, most if not all plot lines and character developments we just went over for the last 4 hours don't make sense. They weren't supported by the previous films, nor were they well executed. They simply happened. The best example being Poe's. He didn't fail throughout the movie when you actually consider his actions. Finn only failed because the writer decided that a BB unit saw his team.
Nazi!
Things like this forced me to come to the conclusion that yes, Rian Johnson wanted this theme, and he shoehorned events to make it happen, but this makes the writing even worse. He put a theme over the characters, over the plot, to force the characters around the theme, to make you think about it on your own personal level, to ignore how inconsistent the writing is, to appear more intellectual. The theme I just went over is also reinterpreted to redemption, loss, or learning, depending on who you speak to, but that should cover it. The next theme people rave about is communication. Many characters fail because of bad communication or accidental communication. So this includes stuff like Poe muting Leia, or Luke being blocked off from communication via the Force, or Kylo and Rey having calls being interrupted regularly, or Finn causing the destruction of transports due to his communication with Poe. This will now reveal the actual intentions of finding themes. People love pattern recognition. Hell, I love it, and I'm going to be doing it with you guys very soon. But when you have no patterns to find in terms of positive pieces of writing within film, you begin to invent them. Another phrase for this would be, you are reading too much into this. The apparent theme of communication is simply an extension of the previous theme about failure, the theme that every character does something wrong and it leads to the death or destruction of something. You can now recontextualize it into a lack of communication instead of failure in general. Luke failed to communicate his teachings to Kylo. Holdo failed to communicate well to her crew. Finn failed to stop his communication with Poe, resulting in the deaths of the people in the transports. Poe failed to communicate with Holdo in a respectful manner, resulting in his lack of information. Rey failed to communicate what she needed to Kylo. It goes on, and the people who love the movie will latch onto every new theme that they can find with this perspective. It allows them to ignore criticism because a theme is above that. You can't kill an idea, right? From there, the themes of greed, morality, and development are all as ham-fisted as the rest. You can take a character, take their plot for the movie, and warp it around your idea. For example, you guys don't have to believe me, but I shot at a random idea in my head, a random word. I decided on resurrection. So I declare that there is a theme of resurrection in Star Wars The Last Jedi. Literally just thrown a dart on a board of words and we have resurrection. Let's go. Do it. Kylo allows the dark side in him to falter and resurrect part of the light. Poe resurrects the part of him that wants to maintain the cause rather than trying to be a hero. Leia is resurrected by the Force. Finn resurrects his interest in causes as he lost that when the First Order revealed their true nature. Yoda is resurrected through the Force as a teacher for Luke. Luke resurrects his faith in the Jedi and in the people who perform good for the galaxy, giving the Resistance a spark of hope. Rey resurrects her own sense of self-worth instead of waiting on her parents to do it for her. Snoke and Hux have successfully resurrected the Empire at the beginning of the film. Is this ham-fisted? Absolutely. Is there somebody on the planet who thinks that this theme of resurrection is actually present in this film? Almost certainly. But this is what people are resorting to in order to define this movie as well written. It's frustrating to have to deconstruct. The social commentary is certainly there in more ways than one, but themes are so subjective that when you try to pry into them, people will get defensive, claiming that you cannot say what you've just said. You can't say that the themes don't exist, but these themes place the content on a shelf that cannot be considered bad. It is the way that they circumvent the entire criticism of the film. The movie is now immune to being the title of bad content. Well, I hate to break this to you, my precious audience, but if you watch my other work, I am one of the people on the internet who will tell you and simultaneously argue to the death that there is such a thing as objective value to content. It sits comfortably alongside subjective value. These are two very different things. You love the themes? That's nice, but the film is still horribly written, meaning that the value you have defined from the project itself is simply for you. It is not measurable or provable. In fact, when put under a lens, it is the opposite. Now let's look at some patterns that actually exist and why they represent rot in the spine of this film. I will start with an easy target. Marketing within the script. For context, I'll simply say Porgs, Crystal Foxes, and Phasma. All of these things only exist for marketing and marketing alone. Serving an additional purpose is only a way to escape the criticism narrowly. Also, I would like to make a disclaimer. Just because I'm creating an argument for the lack of quality for this film that may apply to other Star Wars films, that does not mean the other Star Wars films are the same as this film. Do you understand that point? Good. I'm only naming this set of 3 to prove a pattern. I don't want to spend too long on this point, but let's look a little closer at them. Porgs are cute and playful. They were introduced apparently to CGI over puffins that are local to Skellig Michael, which is the island that Luke is on for the film. But then each scene they are in is played for laughs and cuteness rather than simply being there to cover up these local creatures. Then they begin to pop up in the Millennium Falcon and thus the rest of the film. Will you actually honestly argue that puffins are also local to the Salt Planet? Exactly, so stop pushing that excuse. I don't think anyone can actually see these things as anything but a marketing prop, but I don't think they're going to be as successful as minions or emojis whatsoever. The problem with them is that they absorb a decent chunk of screen time to be funny for the sake of it. It doesn't add pacing or tension. In fact, it usually conflicts with the tone of the preceding or post scenes, as I have made clear previously. It is more about doing it whenever there has been a decent gap without them to remind the audience that these cute little darlings are in fact small enough to buy. But the true nail in their coffin of purpose is Chewbacca, a character who has had a strong connection to Han, Luke, and Leia with his own skill set and purpose within the films. He is now reduced to the Porg's sidekick. Chewie has sunk so low that now he is no more developed or interacted with than the cuddly creatures we assume were placed in there for marketing purposes. Marketing is more important than the writing, and as much as people claim that to be applicable to all of the films, just think about Chewbacca in The Last Jedi. Okay, how about a pattern constructed by those crazy original trilogy fans? That they only brought old characters back to humiliate them. Does that work with Super Leia? Yes. How about Cowardly Luke? Yes. Washed up Han? Yes. Killed off screen for no reason Akbar? Yes. And I think Chewie speaks for himself. Well, that was easy. Next up we have editing. There is a strong pattern with the editing that we have essentially covered throughout my videos, being that it is very choppy and mediocre in terms of the art itself. So what I'm talking about here are instances where there are shortcuts and mistakes made that you would not expect for such a high-budget film. These are the biggest offenders. Phasma's sudden loss and gaining of a gun, the teleporting bombers, the turret that came out and went out of nowhere, Holdo's visit to the hangar, Rey teleporting from Snoke's throne room to Crate without a single connecting scene, Phasma and his stormtroopers disappearing without a trace, time being something that is avoided for consistency's sake, the army of troopers and the BB unit coming in from nowhere.
Nazi!
Ultimately, you can call this a directing issue or even a writing issue, as these may be all the editor could work with. But assuming he had all the connecting scenes, it makes no sense to put the film together like this. It was rushed as well as incompetent. An audience is not supposed to be hit with things like this when you're accomplished and experienced as a writer-director teamed with an editor. It is so beyond amateurish because it steals investment from people. How do you remain immersed when you can't follow simplistic events like people going to places and objects existing? That was easy, so let's move on to tonal confusion. These are essentially the prank call with Hux while the stakes are rising for the destruction of the Resistance, Luke throwing his lightsaber over his shoulder after a scene that gave his intro respect and reverence, the mutiny mixed in with the iron joke, Rey being bonked by the lightsaber while trying to kill the main villain, Luke brushing off the assault despite the way his character had been built, and so on. I don't think you need to understand much about the pattern here or why it's bad, since it is very obvious. Don't provide your audience with multiple conflicting emotions at the same time. It is distracting and it also cuts right through the immersion. Disney has been criticized for this, when I am certain that this is Rian Johnson instead. Disney have control over Marvel Studios right now, and people are saying that this is tonally inappropriate because they tend to shove in jokes where they do not work. I disagree. There are great and terrible jokes in Marvel films. They take place in ways that can get in the way of the grief that happens within the films, or they sit comfortably alongside them. I want to make a series of videos on Marvel. This is because I have a lot to say about the shifting quality throughout the films, as well as some of the greatest tragic writing I've seen for a superhero. But for now, I have noticed a pattern that when people say a Marvel film fails miserably, people often criticize Disney for tanking it, meddling with it in the background, and basically strangling the director or the writer. When the movie succeeds, you'll hear praises for the individual director striking out and carrying the film. So it seems very stacked against Disney. I don't think Disney are great as an entity, far from it. Honestly, for me, the film usually gets informed by the past work of the director or writer, and then some extra stuff you can get from social media or interviews about meddling, though overall, I have not gotten the impression that Disney are to blame for this huge amount of comedy in modern Marvel films, or lack thereof. For example, Ragnarok is easily one of the funniest films I have seen to date. Yeah, sue me, I know lots of people hated the comedy, like the Dishonored Wolf guy, but his video on Ragnarok is honestly terrible. It lacked any kind of cogent argument, which is unfortunate because his video on Star Wars The Last Jedi was actually great. It was chock full of passionate logical arguments, but there we are. This is a taste of my work, by the way, for new fans. I have no compunction about criticizing my peers. They get as good as they give, and I expect the same. Regardless, the reason I think Ragnarok is so funny compared to other Marvel films is the director, Taika Waititi, especially considering his past work. Then, further to the middle of the scale, I think Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1 balanced humor and action-oriented drama fantastically, which I genuinely attribute to James Gunn and his past work. Finally, on the edge of the other side of the scale, we have Captain America Civil War, a film that seems to have mainly been sprinkling humor among much more dramatic elements with moments that genuinely pull the heartstrings. But you know what? Civil War had some great jokes in it. They were timed and delivered with a suitable context and a strong understanding of the characters who were delivering the lines. And then, when Civil War needed to be quiet, serious, and heart-wrenching, it pulled it off without a hitch. The point here is I don't think Disney is the one to blame for this horrid mismatching of tone in The Last Jedi. When it comes down to bad timing, misunderstood characters, inappropriate tone, and lowbrow humor, I think it's the writer-director's fault, since the writer controls what these characters are saying and how they perform their actions, while the director makes sure it happens as they saw it in their head. Is Disney responsible for the film? Yes. But I see Rian Johnson's hands all over this project, not simply Disney. Just like I see J.J. Abrams all over The Force Awakens, not simply Disney. So yes, on with the patterns. Next up would be the phrase, style over substance. This is of course in reference to the idea that you put your eye candy before your writing. Films like Speed Racer, Enter the Void, Transformers, 300, and Avatar are also used as examples in this sort of genre, if you can call it that. Some of those examples are far worse than others, but you get the point. The Last Jedi has a strong pattern of style over substance. Let's go through a few so you know what I'm talking about. Phasma disappears and then reappears in smoke, making no sense, but it looks imposing. The hyperspace jump makes no sense in universe, but it looks incredible. The destruction of the bridge on the Radis makes no sense, but it looks impactful. The bomber ships make no sense, but they reference World War II bombers, which looks striking. Phasma falling into a sudden pit of fiery death makes no sense, but it looks intense. Basically, a lot of things happen for the sake of the visual, or sometimes it'll be a writing tool, but I am more concerned with the former. Special effects in the OT were revolutionary, and they described space battles for the most part. Grounded space battles, for lack of a better term. Things were gritty and realistic within their own rule set, in terms of the props for the most part. The prequels then basically turned everything into digital goo, spread across the walls and floors all over the place, trying to make a more science fiction environment. Most of the time it informed the events at hand, but it was clearly going way too far in many places, crafting environments that looked all too similar or basically too much noise on the screen. But the new trilogy is using some very expensive techniques in direction and CGI to create shots that are less about informing the events or describing the world or grounding the elements. It is meant to dazzle, distract, and impress, even if it is detrimental to the script, to the logic of the universe, and to the understanding of the audience. This is common throughout the movie and it worked wonders. How many people have you heard say, "This is the best looking Star Wars movie. This is the most gorgeous Star Wars movie I've ever seen. One of the best looking films I have ever seen." And these people aren't wrong. It is a beautiful film, and those lights, colors, and noises are enough to take most people away from the horribly written story. This is a pattern enough in the film that I'm almost certain is by design. Dazzle that audience. Don't let them think about what's happening under the hood. Next up would be conveniences, and this film is hemorrhaging with those more so than I have seen in a long time, and it's a real shame because it breaks rules from the established universe as well as the film's own rules. This is a classic error in writing. It includes stuff like, oh no, you got caught and placed in space prison? But it's fine because you found a locksmith inside who doubles as your codebreaker, who doubles as your only ticket out of the place, who doesn't need to be paid. Wow. Oh no, the First Order's fleet have caught you and you can't jump to hyperspace. But it's fine, they can't catch up with you as they're too slow. Wow. Oh no, you were locked in a dead end and the First Order is on its way. But it's fine, there's a way out through the back now. Wow. Oh no, Leia's been blown out the airlock by a massive explosion. But it's fine, she used the Force. Wow. Oh no, Rey has been captured by the First Order and she's at the mercy of Snoke, Ren, and Hux. But it's fine, Snoke dies, Ren's unconscious, and there's a transport nearby that gets her to the Millennium Falcon. Wow. There are hundreds more, but you get my point. As you've probably noticed, these patterns are getting worse in nature, and this one is a death by 1,000 cuts. There are conveniences in most, if not all, stories. Things that happen that make you think to yourself, okay, the writer made this happen in order for X to happen. It did not feel natural or realistic. This is not something that is in The Last Jedi. This is something that encompasses The Last Jedi. There isn't an attempt to stick to your guns and fight out of the situation the characters are put in. Some of them should downright be dead or at the very least suffering massively, but Rian Johnson just writes them back out. An investment in the world or the situations presented plummets from an already dreary position. But let's get to the pattern that everyone recognized. Subversion. Which would be stuff like Luke throwing his lightsaber off the cliff, Snoke only wanting Rey to get to Luke, killing Leia only to bring her back, Snoke was nothing, Poe is the only one who was wrong the whole time, Kylo's dark side training meant kill Rey, Rey's parents are no one. Again, you get it now. The pattern has one strong purpose, and that is to create new and interesting content based solely on what the audience expects to see. I use The Departed as an example of what you can do to benefit from such a choice, but why doesn't it work with The Last Jedi? Snoke being nothing adds nothing to the story. Killing Leia and bringing her back immediately was almost filler because it was a springboard for Holdo and that writing nightmare, and ultimately it adds nothing to the story. Luke throwing the lightsaber off the cliff was tone deaf and added nothing to the story. Poe was reasonable and heroic, but then forced to be a fool for no reason, which added nothing to the story. Kylo's history with the dark side and training and meeting with Snoke was incredibly simple and added nothing to the story. Kylo's dark side training simply meant kill Rey, which added nothing to the story. Rey having no relevant parents adds nothing to the story. Each of these results of events set up by either the film itself or The Force Awakens could have opened up huge possibilities for the progression and the characters, but instead they are shunted in favor of nothing, by virtue of it not being something people saw coming. This is an argument that is circulating the internet a lot. The story is simply taking paths you didn't want it to. If I wanted Palpatine to be Rey's grandfather and it turned out to be Gola Bunt, the traveling merchant who knows much about the Force and the First Order yet stays neutral until he meets Rey after abandoning her, I would be interested to see what they can do with that, but I wouldn't be angry that they didn't do the Palpatine thing. Do you understand? When they subvert me and say that it turns out it wasn't anything, that can be pretty disappointing and frustrating. You took my investment and laughed at me for having it. You laughed at me for caring about a story you were telling. You can't take all of these elements, be aware of what everyone is excited for, and then turn it into a brown, shallow sludge, throw it in people's faces and laugh at them, claiming that it is great because it subverted your expectations by doing nothing innovative whatsoever. The way this works is once upon a time stories were a little blander and simpler with extremely predictable endings like the hero wins, the victims are saved, and the bad guy is dead. But then as time went on, the less predictable stuff started to happen. Is the bad guy evil? Do the victims get saved? Did the hero win? And now we have loads of this sort of thing in media, loads of attempts to tell new and interesting stories. Game of Thrones is practically built upon this idea. So subversion is like trying to find the ending that nobody's done yet, the one that nobody expects yet wanted to see without realizing it. Rian Johnson decided to come full circle, and now he believes the most basic and boring ideas in storytelling have become subversion and therefore celebratory because no one else is using them.
And as we all know, subverting expectations in and of itself is an accomplishment, regardless of how satisfying it is narratively.
And you see, I subverted your expectations
by
subverting the subversion.
That's immediately
satisfying. The thing that you thought was going to happen in the first place happens. You know, I like plot twists that make the story less interesting.
But I'm satisfied because you subverted my expectations.
Yay!
Star Wars in theaters now.
This infects the film horrendously as large character or story-based decisions are being deflected and deflated or forgotten in order to be different because it was too difficult to create something new and truly subversive. Now you have to go with simply saying it was all for nothing. Please clap. Comparatively, this film also engages in subversion because it is getting away from the tropes of the previous film, quote-unquote, but it also apes off them in spades. So many scenes and pieces of dialogue stolen directly from episode 5 and 6 under the guise of a cyclical nature, a referential homage to the older films, when the whole defense for the film is that it isn't taking the root of those films. The Last Jedi amounts to the premise of episode 5 with a strange B-plot that everyone hates, leading to the end of episode 6 and then back to the beginning of episode 5, otherwise known as Frankenstein's monster. A mismatched cluster of ripped ideas with inconsistent threads attempting to connect them, and horrible, shallow, or useless endings to several ideas spawned in the first movie.
It subverts your expectations.
It really subverts your expectations.
Because as long as you subvert expectations, it doesn't matter what you do.
It's so narratively satisfying.
They expected a review of terrible B movies.
And it became a review of The Last Jedi. 2 minutes of entertainment tonight? Is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying.
All right. Pretty fair.
It's kind of like the Last Jedi.
It's also like The Last Jedi because this episode should have ended 20 minutes ago.
Yeah.
The important thing is subverting your expectations.
Right. Narratively, it might, make your entire movie fall on its face, but you subverted expectations. You got about 2 minutes of entertainment. Yeah. There's 2 minutes of expectations that were subverted.
Now, we only have 2 patterns remaining, first being the plot holes. This film has a metric ton of plot holes, and the best defense people tend to have for this one is, well, you don't know the actual definition of plot hole. So let's start here. In fiction, a plot hole, or plot error is a gap or inconsistency in a storyline that goes against the flow of logic established by a story's plot. Such inconsistencies include such things as illogical or impossible events, and statements or events that contradict earlier events in the storyline. So, do we have many examples of this? The First Order is galactically powerful despite being established as small within the galaxy. The Dreadnought does not use life scanners, shown to be extremely useful in the past. Surface cannons are still ineffective against fighters despite their apparent 60-year history of being developed. There is no use of Y-Wings despite them being far more effective, as well as B-Wings. The First Order have a device that never loses track of a ship as long as they've viewed it once. This has never been done in the saga before, and we can expect it to cause major problems in the future films. One fighter has the ability to destroy the bridge and the hangar bay of a major cruiser with a single pair of missiles despite this never happening before. Leia uses one of the most powerful Force abilities in history with no understanding of the Force. Finn thinks hyperspace tracking is impossible despite having mopped the area supporting the device itself. Rey translates for Luke despite him knowing Chewie for 30 plus years, and I'm already gonna stop. This is ridiculous. You can already watch my previous videos for the rest of them, but again, you get the point. The film is rotting with plot holes, things happening with no prior reasoning whatsoever, or people not knowing things when they should do in order to be more dramatic or shocking. Which brings us to the final obvious pattern that I have spotted. When faced with this tsunami of writing issues, people will try any and all methods to brave the storm. We have been through pretty much all of them in this series, but there is something about them that you guys may not have noticed. People writing Rian Johnson's script for him. They fill in the gaps, massive character histories, world rules, and explanations of inconsistent events to make the film stronger because it cannot survive on its own. And this is outside of the third-party information as well. This is akin to placing scaffolding on a building after it's been built in order to run repairs, only here the story is desperately falling apart. Let me give you some examples of things people have said as if they come from the film while they actually come from their own fan fictions or head canons. The new bombers were used because the classic bombers weren't good enough to destroy the Dreadnought. Finn Finn pulled Rose into a trench and got him back to the base without being seen by the First Order that way. The material that created Phasma's armor is limited to the point where they could only make one for her. The bombs on the ship were magnetized. Leia trained with Luke for the 30-year gap. The Resistance set their speed to be exactly as fast as the max speed of the First Order to evade them. There was a force field in the bomber to prevent the vacuum of space. The hyperspace move was suitable for the situation at hand, where it wouldn't have been in every single battle previously in the series. Leia had an adrenaline boost, thus allowing her to perform abilities that no other Jedi could. The Codebreaker is a drunk who sleeps off small crimes, waiting for someone he can help to end up in jail too. Do you understand the pattern here? People will actively create their own story in their own heads to ignore the flaws within the script, pulling at universal rules to match their scenarios and hope that if they can just plug up each of these little holes in the film itself, then it will remain a masterpiece, and that is honestly sad. Why can't we have a conversation about the reality of the situation? Why do we have to invent a fiction to make the fiction make more sense? Why don't we instead just talk about the genuine quality of the film? To the people who have to invent the narrative to improve the quality of the film, I say this. You told many fans that their expectation ruined the experience of the film, that they wanted to see their own ideas on screen, that they shouldn't have been speculating or writing fan fiction of their own. You are doing the exact same thing in reverse right now when you invent your own headcanon in order to like the film. Please have some self-awareness. Ultimately, you were upset by the fact that you enjoyed the film despite its heavy flaws, and so you told yourself a better story to get around that. You told yourself you watched a better film. So hopefully you can now understand, with the chronological retelling of the film combined with a series of writing patterns, that this is extremely poor. The film itself is carried by its name, and if this was the plot of a B-movie that no one cared about, it would be sitting at a safe 1 to 2 out of 10. Imagine what the end result of this film would have been without the money behind it to fund the actors, the set pieces, and the CGI. These things don't matter in the grand scheme, not even the assets poached from Star Wars as a franchise. They do not matter to the writing. The effects will age, the shots will age, every choice will age. Writing and storytelling is timeless. Some of the greatest stories are not modern. When the prequel trilogy was being released, the majority of fans loved it. I didn't even really think there was a single thing wrong with the movies, but that was because I was too young to think critically. When the prequels were given years and years of exposure, not to mention Plinkett's reviews, the films sank dramatically, almost turning into a complete joke. Only to now enter the counterculture that Dark Souls 2 has entered, where people are now actively defending the prequels as great films instead, as if we missed something. Honestly folks, I love the prequels. You may have spotted that from the amount of footage I've used in these videos. They have a special place in my heart, and I could talk about the positives in them all day, but they are objectively poorly written films. Perhaps I can go over in more detail on that one day. Regardless, mark my words, The Last Jedi sycophants will come around. You have to give them time. Once they do, potentially years from now, the general view on The Last Jedi will be it's the one that killed the modern trilogy and the one that potentially killed the franchise profitability, as the OT fans were already gone thanks to Episode 7. But for the ones that remained, and the fan base that was built by the modern trilogy, a huge portion of them have been completely severed thanks to this new film. Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself, I do that a lot. Let's conclude all of this properly. People seem to think that fantasy is a genre and subsequently science fiction or space operas do not adhere to rules. This is a myth and a poorly propagated one. Good writing adheres to rules, bad writing forgets them. This is monumentally simplistic. If we can't agree on this, if you seriously don't understand my perspective, you're on the wrong channel. In addition to this, people are saying you cannot judge the film without having seen its sequel, because that will end this film. But as we know from Rian Johnson, there was no roadmap, and as much as J.J. Abrams will attempt to fix what Rian has done here, he will be unsuccessful. I can promise you that. You can absolutely judge a huge portion of the elements in The Last Jedi without having seen the 9th episode. The suggestion that you can't is simply a smokescreen to ward off criticism like every other argument in favor of this film's writing, which many have criticized me for digging into, citing that plot holes and inconsistencies can be found in every movie. First of all, no. There are movies with airtight writing, you just haven't seen them. Secondly, a handful of plot holes or conveniences are a little bit different to massive canyon-sized ones. It's all about context. To try and turn the conversation into a binary checkbox is ridiculous. There are places on the scale for films to fall in between. If they have a handful of small conveniences, the film can of course still be great, but not when it's literal Swiss cheese. Regardless, once you get to this point in the conversation, the goalposts will then be moved to their final position in terms of argumentation. This is a quote from the comments section that is echoed in many places across the internet. You don't search for logic in a Star Wars movie. A movie full of laser weapons, noisy explosions in space, and little Muppets running around. You need to remember that this is a movie first with visual metaphor, and it's not a documentary about real things happening in space. Alright, it's time once and for all to destroy this argument. What if the 9th episode of the series opens with Luke saying, "The Sith must end too. I totally forgot. Sorry, lol. I'm sleepy, I guess." And he jumps, wearing only a nappy, into space. He chops every last Death Star, Star Destroyer, etc. in half and kicks the supremacy into a local sun. He then stands on the sun and says, "Kylo, you must return to the Jedi because they are actually okay and really cool." And so Kylo does. Rey and Kylo get married, Luke begins to date Poe, Chewbacca becomes a Jedi, Finn discovers that he was Snoke's father, and finally Leia says the rebellion is reborn as a new invader arrives. His name is Glorm, and he is the brother of Snoke, setting up the sequel trilogy, as Glorm the Sith Lord has brought the mighty army of Flams, which are legendary Sith warriors. Would that be something you consider bad? Because if you did, if you said to me that this is terrible writing, do you know what I'd say back to you? You don't search for logic in a Star Wars movie. A movie full of laser weapons, noisy explosions in space, and little Muppets running around. You need to remember that this is a movie first with visual metaphor and not a documentary about real things happening in space. Yeah, it isn't fun to have to swallow your own medicine, but it raises a good point, and that is that there is a scale for all of us. We just place things differently overall. I think the key is to actually figure out what scale to agree on first and then move forward. Okay then, finally. You have to agree that the original films were just as flawed, right? They were flawed, but nowhere near as much as this mess, and fundamentally the originals had some incredible characters to connect to. What does this movie have? The reasonable fool, the flawless slate, the directionless friend, the incompetent hero, the person who is there, and of course the cowardly grump. I don't know about you guys, but I can't wait to get the figures for this lot, to play extra stories for them in the games, to read about their adventures in the novels, to imagine what they got up to in between films. Yeah, sounds like a lot of time well spent. Ultimately, this film has a strong fan base, and that is fine, since there are millions of people who are watching it. There's obviously going to be a strong fan base for the positive. People still loved it, but the more worrying part is that it punched a hole in many of the more, for some reason, respected reviewers on this site. It is being praised as a masterpiece with flaws, a fantastic addition to the saga, as well as potentially the best Star Wars film yet, which is bizarre to me and many others considering everything we've covered in the last 4 and a bit hours. They are making conscious efforts to convince you that this is actually good content.
These new Star Wars movies can be better than the original ones. I mean, guys, they're essentially the same stories, but with better action, better jokes, better characters, better effects. Oh, God, I can hear those million voices again. I'm sorry.
Stop right there, you ridiculous person. I think that Red Letter Media hit the nail on the head for this sort of thing with the Nerd Crew podcast, that it's a money thing, especially with people from new rock stars. It's way more profitable to be nice and happy for everything than to be horrible to everything. You are child-friendly as well as pleasing to those who genuinely liked the film, and how many people are going to rip into you for saying that you simply liked something? But yeah, I've been sent so many videos on defending this film that I've essentially gotten to the point where I couldn't respond to them in a consistent manner other than summing up each argument as we went through. On top of that, there are some more people who have covered it that I think are worth mentioning by name. We have the Nostalgia Critic, Cinemassacre, Looper, New Rockstars obviously, Movie Bob, Kevin Smith, and a bunch of others that have really strained the content to find the positives, and they have painted a different picture than the disaster that it actually is. YMS completely missed the mark, and rather than assessing the inconsistencies as a whole, he ignored them and only focused on 1 or 2 that he actually recognized, claiming that the reaction to the film's quality was unwarranted, which is actually something a lot of people are parroting. If only we had an arbiter to tell us how we should be reacting. Sadly, even Jenny Nichols strawmanned the perspective of the people who didn't like the film. You know, you live long enough to become a villain, that sort of thing. There's a strange behavior surrounding this film and its critics, like people genuinely ignoring thousands of blatant mistakes on top of horrid choices for the plot and characters. I understand why some of you think they are paid off, but maybe it is really just as simple as they don't see their own bias. They're not being critical. Ultimately, in Jenny's case, maybe she was the perfect person to deconstruct Suicide Squad, but she's just not very good when it comes to Star Wars. It would be the same thing if I covered something like the Bourne trilogy. I really don't know what I'm talking about with them, because I never really liked them. I just saw them. You know, like I'm the wrong person to do it. Oh, this should explain, by the way, that you shouldn't really make requests for films outside of maybe Star Wars episodes, because I'm only good at certain things and that's what I stick to. Anyway, we're kind of hoping for a great Plinkett review, but the problem is that he is he's a bit strange these days. He spent 60% of his Force Awakens review ripping into the prequels. You could say that I'm worried about what he's going to do with The Last Jedi. I mean, I love Red Letter Media, but the obsession with saying something nobody else has said is now cornering them into weird reviews that almost come across as botched in a lot of ways.
I don't think this is terrible. It's sporadically interesting. Isn't that an accurate statement?
That's a very good quote.
Yes.
You know, guys, these people, they might actually really think the film is great and they want to defend it as much as they possibly can with any argument they can find. So I'm providing an open invitation to any of these people. We can have a fun little debate about the quality of this film. I think it would be really fun because ultimately, for those of you who are new to my channel, this may shock you, but Star Wars The Last Jedi is objectively bad content. It is provable. This is factual. You may enjoy the film, and even love the film, that's absolutely fine, but it is a poorly written film that stands as an objective insult to intelligence. Everything positive said about the film is either about the superficial elements that take money to generate, or the subjective arguments that stem from themes to interpretations to feelings. The vast majority of my points aren't about perspective, we are talking about facts. And if you don't want to agree with them, then it will be difficult to have discussions in the future because this is precisely how one creates a scale and moves on from it. If you think The Last Jedi is great, good luck ever calling other films bad.
Unsubscribe.
Regardless, as I said, there is an open invitation to these creators to have a debate with me. I think the biggest offender, and the one I would love to debate the most, would be I Hate Everything. His video Sorry, what? What? You guys want me to respond to his video specifically and in detail? I'm not doing that, and even if I did, it would be a separate video because I'm not doing that. There's no way, it's not going to happen. Like, have I ever responded to a content creator before? I don't think so. Check the description. I'm not going to be so petty as to say someone's opinion is wrong. What am I, a monster? Anyway, this film overall has been described as divisive, in that it has more detractors than any Star Wars previously, including The Phantom Menace. This is celebrated as a fact about its creativity, when in reality it should, by the author's own metric, tell them that it is the worst Star Wars to date. I am not one to go by popular vote, it is a fallacy, but people who say this have to stick to their own rules of argumentation. If you are happy to admit it is the most divisive, and thus creative Star Wars film according to audience response, then you have to conclude it is also the worst film by audience response as well. Be consistent, please. Anyway, Rian Johnson has come out saying that Star Wars was always going to split the fan base if it was to stay vital and grow, which alongside many of the argument methods I presented from the actual fans who love the film, such as the film is breaking down the canon and mythos, it's a new direction and a reimagining. These arguments, including Rian's comments, sidestep the issue at hand, that you have created poor work, bad work, for something that does not get to have another chance. Something that is very important to people, whether or not you care about that. You had the opportunity, nay the responsibility, to get the band back together, to have them see and feel something together again. You had the actors paid and enthusiastic. Nobody will have that power again. You had one moment in our universe, in our timeline, and you squandered it. So, as a community, we were left with nowhere to go in terms of the cinematic experience. We have to leave that behind now. But that doesn't mean our voices won't be heard. Films like this are exactly why videos like mine are born, and why you have now created a potential career for me. That's how awful your writing is. Is that not insane to think about? As I have said, I think it's pertinent to repeat. The biggest claim goes that fan theories were annihilated and thus those fans hated the movie. But the reality is that those who loved the film had to theorize plots and characters to have it work. They have to create fan theories in order to love the film.
Ironic.
Not to mention that fans used to say that episode 7 will be made better by 8, and now the line is episode 7 and 8 will be made better by 9. Believe me, I'm looking forward to seeing how wrong that will be. And that pretty much brings us to a close, people. I think it's pertinent to say that with this new trilogy, the makers wanted all of the benefits of the saga. The characters, the actors, the world, the assets, and the fan base. They wanted to play with and make money with all of it, but they didn't want the responsibility of taking care of it. They didn't want to have to pay any attention to what came before, just superficially take what they wanted out of it and benefit from it as a whole. Rian Johnson has since been trying to explain his film in multiple interviews with a collection of extremely amusing, excuses for the horrible choices. He is attempting to try and plug up the holes of the films. He has dashed the theories that Leia was trained by Luke. He has said that Snoke is definitively dead, alongside Rey's parentage being truly unimportant. There is no trick from Kylo. For those who want something more while being fans of the film, that must be rough to know. Ryan has an infamous quote saying that Rey and Luke are the beating heart of the film and their relationship is the core of the film. Can any of you remotely understand that from seeing the movie? Ultimately, on Rian Johnson, I honestly believe he's a great guy who puts the emotion before the logic every time in his films. He wants to make you feel before anything else without appreciating the importance of rules within the progression of a story being told, and that will often lead to the most explosive and heart-wrenching events in storytelling. Building things in terms of rules and logic to cut directly to your emotions with a scene that not only makes sense, but feels so incredibly human to watch. I do want to say that yes, there are actually some positives in this film. I believe the visuals of this film were extremely satisfying, and if Rian Johnson is responsible for them, rather than his director of photography, then I would hire Rian in a heartbeat to perform that job. I would heartily recommend him. I would, however, get a legal document denying him commentary on the script whatsoever, as he does not know what he is doing. On top of that, the more superficial aspects of the film were mostly nailed, like sound design or the visual splendor, the acting, Adam Driver, the on-set filming. Unfortunately, outside of Adam and several others' talent, these things just come down to how much money a project has. Rian Johnson wrote Luke to have a classic fall due to hubris, to fail under his own perception of himself and the monolithic collective he'd worked to sustain. So you have to wonder, perhaps Rian could have learned from this lesson himself, to not be such a victim of hubris as well. Ultimately, Star Wars as a movie made people fall in love with a fictional world and its characters. As a byproduct, they fell in love with a brand. That brand lives on today. And now, Star Wars as a brand is making people fall in love with the movies in a most shallow and empty way. It doesn't matter what it is anymore, just as long as it's called Star Wars. Well, that didn't take long, did it? Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to me prattle on. I'm sure you're all bored to tears right now, so I'll let you go. But before that, I wanted to talk about some more meta things for a minute or two. What can you expect from my channel now? Well, firstly, I'll happily cover Star Wars in the future, as I love covering a slow-motion car crash of the sequels to some of my favorite movies of all time. Like anyone else does, I guess. In that, I have happily come to terms with the expectation that I should have for future Star Wars films, and judging by how the Han Solo film is looking, you guys can expect a similar treatment for that as I have done for The Last Jedi, from rage to critique, though you're gonna have to be patient. Other than that, I will be creating rage videos for my most despised films, and believe me, there are a lot. I'm not going to spoil it, folks. You'll simply see them pop up on your feed one day, and hopefully it'll give you a few laughs. Other than that, I have a few intentions with long-form content. I have a bunch of projects in the pipeline that I want to cover, and so you will see these things pop up alongside the rages. Outside of that, you guys can expect a podcast from me and my friends every once in a while, as well as maybe a few offhand videos on topics I want to cover. Now, I would like to tell you folks about what you may not have seen on my channel. If you got through these videos, the hours and hours of analytical content, then maybe you'd be more inclined to check these out once I describe them to you. Bear in mind that just like the Star Wars videos, I am trying to make my videos for the fans of the content, but I am also making sure to accommodate those who have no idea what I'm talking about. My best work is easily my series comparing Soma to Amnesia and how the horror genre has evolved. I spent just over 3 full-time months working between jobs scouring the internet and games I'm covering to truly understand and describe what is the extremely complicated and downright masterful delivery of harrowing philosophical questions about what life is defined as and what makes us human. I would wholeheartedly recommend the series, however it is my first Angria series, so it has swearing and insults to other YouTubers that really annoyed me. So viewer discretion is advised. Next up would be my response to H-Bomber Guy in relation to Dark Souls 2. I consider this series to be my best argumentation. It is literally so re-scripted that I couldn't have done any better looking back in terms of my actual script. I worked extremely hard on it for this series, making sure that I not only didn't insult Harris, but I responded while breaking down his arguments and proving that his methods are used to trick his audience, while providing evidence contrary to what he's put forth. Considering every last piece of evidence in the the final part of that series, I really think that it's pretty obvious Dark Souls 2 is an inferior game. I drew a strong line between subjective and objective content in the series, and it's probably my best writing so far. On top of that, I have several video game critiques that are rather in-depth as explorations of quality. I believe the most impressive one right now is Outlast, considering it's so huge and in-depth. It actually tripled in size from what I expected it to be because there was so much to talk about. But there's also Yooka-Laylee and Resident Evil 7 if you're interested. Now, if you like my work, you can check out one of these three to get a better taste of my channel or how I deconstruct media, but if you really only want to see movie content, then that's absolutely fine. I would now like to thank Metal, Mr. Emi, Fortier, and Drew for checking out my videos ahead of time to help me spot the errors and fix a bunch of things that were factually wrong or just editing mistakes. They make a world of difference, you have no idea, so thank you. So, at this point, if you haven't left, even though the analysis is over, I assume you actually really do like my work. And I'd like to share that I love committing to making it. If you'd like to help me turn it into my career, then please check out my Patreon. I've almost hit my first goal as of right now, thanks to all of this Star Wars stuff, and it's actually insane. Once I hit the $100 mark, I'm probably going to do something nice for the channel. If you'd like to see what I mean, I post updates on my channel as well as laying out my goals clearly on my Patreon page. You don't have to pay to see them, they're all laid out. So I just want to be clear about that. I treat Patreon as a donation service. You're not buying goods. I don't want to bait you guys with rewards and Instagram photos or something. I just want to keep it real. Donate what you feel my videos are worth to you personally, and only if you feel you can afford it. It is important to me that you don't feel cheated on this sort of thing, since there are so many horror stories. I've recently rewritten my Patreon to try and make all of this clear, as well as what you can expect with the milestones. For example, I have 4 tiers of donation, and they're literally just me saying thank you. It has nothing to do with rewards. At this point, Patreon has bought me 2 new pairs of glasses, as I broke my old ones after a few years of use, and it bought me a new chair that also broke over time. These things are why I find Patreon so brilliant. And on that note, I would like to thank I Do Not Want a Waifu, Drew, Ursharak, Michael Steiger, John Robinson, Eric Markinowski, Cluto Metis, Ryan Strohmeyer, Blade, Zaki, Elias Smidgard, Patrick Breedlove, Matthew Kadish, Mark Orell, Igor, Jessica Turner, Max McIntyre, Peter Morovan, Crowley, Michael Stopper, and Sasa P, with a huge thank you to the generosity of Marco Cabodi, Noah Williams, Christopher Colin Tooley, Alexander Griffiths, and Lydia Sparrow. Thanks to you guys, this dream of mine is getting more and more real as the days go by. I appreciate the investment you've all put into my work, and I will continue to provide the best I can for all of you. If you're interested in supporting me on Patreon, the link is in the description. Okay, that is the end of the video. This last bit is pretty much for my super fans only. So shoo off people who only wanted to see Star Wars and shoo off the new people. You need to know about the whole Dark Souls 2 series in order to understand this next bit, but you can check it out if you really want to. Like I said, it'll make so much more sense if you've seen the series first, but here we go. There is a channel called Folding Ideas. The guy who runs the channel has an awesome video going over the editing in Suicide Squad, and it's probably my favorite description of what is wrong with that film. He found my series on H-Bomber Guy, and he is friends with him, so naturally he did not like it, but he went a step further than just saying that. He said, it's largely unbearable smugness presenting shallow, unimaginative opinions, which is honestly rough to hear from somebody you respect, but then he says this. I skipped to the dude's last video, his own Defense of Dark Souls 2 video. The first 2 minutes are, there are so many weapons to choose from, so many enemies to kill, and it is set before you as a world to conquer by exploration and destruction of your presumed enemies. Imagine being the person who plays Dark Souls 2 and comes out the other end thinking options and conquest are the appropriate foremost descriptors for the game. Okay, people who liked my series are probably aware of what is wrong here, but let's go through it quickly. Folding Ideas was skipping through my videos, not watching more than a handful of minutes at a time, and yet he's making sweeping claims about them. He said it's largely unbearable smugness presenting shallow, unimaginative opinions when he hasn't even watched collectively half of a video of the 14-hour series. This is so embarrassing and just genuinely rude. He skipped to the beginning of the 2 minutes of my last video and judged it as a bad perspective on Dark Souls 2. Had he waited for 5 minutes, he would know that it was a parody. I was making that abundantly clear, that it was essentially a joke, and he took it seriously because he didn't see the reveal just minutes later. How telling is that in terms of his intentions of insulting me? That he screwed it up that badly. He then says that conquest and options for builds are terrible ways to describe this action RPG about clearing areas, killing bosses, and setting up a skill set based on what you prefer. This doesn't make any sense. How do you become so fundamentally wrong? Some other guy actually supports this. This is quite possibly the worst read of Dark Souls stuff I've ever seen. I'm impressed the dude is missing the point by that much. What are you both talking about? I talk about the themes and the story in Dark Souls 2 about 4 minutes after the build diversity in the video. He just didn't watch that part, so he assumes it doesn't exist. On top of that, his fanbase had one consistent complaint about my videos. People kept saying that the whole measured response title doesn't make sense and that 10 hours cannot be considered measured. First of all, measured doesn't mean short, you fools. And secondly, it's in reference to H-Bomber Guy himself. His response videos are titled that way, and so when I responded to him, I wanted to mirror that. The cherry on the cake of this utter mess is that someone responded to the criticisms of the length and said, I swear there's something up with right-wing gamers and their inability to edit. I'm a right-wing gamer now. What are you talking about? What did my video even cover that was remotely political? I make a point to avoid that side of discussion unless absolutely necessary, and yet I am right-wing? I have to say it was an interesting experience, as I have never had a spotlight from someone that popular, but they missed the mark so fundamentally that I could only read hundreds of negative comments about the work overall from people who hadn't even watched beyond 5 minutes, and that is sad. I gained about 30 subscribers from the person who shared it to Folding Ideas, and a few new fans, so that was cool. And honestly, to the guy who shared my video, you know who you are, and I want to thank you again. Do not feel 1 ounce of guilt for trying to put my videos out there. It's not always going to resonate with people, but the fact is you actually tried to share my perspective, so I really appreciate the effort, thank you. But it doesn't stop there, folks. As time went on, H-Bomber Guy ignored the existence of my series, but my Star Wars video came out and went viral. This gave a lot of traction to my channel. And so, from what I can tell, H-Bomber Guy caught a couple of tweets about my series, and so he finally gave it a full chance. He watched it right the way through. No, he skipped through it. Nobody wants to watch 9 hours, so they decide to watch random parts of it out of order, because that makes more sense than watching the opening 10 minutes, doesn't it? Harris criticized me for taking him seriously when he said people don't need lock-on to play Monster Hunter. Do you remember that bit, guys? When I said that as a Monster Hunter player, I could tell him that yes, people wanted a lock-on, and it sucks that we didn't have one. And now, they do have one in the new game. So, whoops. Apparently that wasn't a serious argument from him. Apparently he was joking, so I responded by saying that I treated it as a serious argument with full context because it sounded like one. And whether or not it was serious, it was wrong. The fact that I left the quote in context means that my audience can decide for themselves from his cadence and his tone whether or not it was a joke. No harm, no foul. Ultimately, Harris was rather cordial, if not completely condescending at the end. He tweeted out that I clearly put time and effort in and that I'm committed, but I still do it badly. That long-form content to this degree is not the way to go about making videos. Well, now that I've been found by a fan base that actually wants this kind of content, I can definitively say that you're wrong, Harris. And I've had an overwhelming amount of support for my style of content, and I think it's just what YouTube needs. The problem is that everything is already truncated down and sold off each day for views, with barely anyone taking the time to be clear and concise, so I am more than happy to say that I will not be taking your advice. However, I appreciate the sentiment versus the whole mess that Folding Ideas tried and failed to pull. Isn't it ironic that they complain about my videos being too long when they can't catch more than a few minutes out of sequence? Had I made a 10-minute long video, they still wouldn't have gotten the point. After that, a fan of H-Bomber Guy claimed that he was certain that I was simply mentally unhealthy to have created the series, that I do not possess a happy or healthy mind, when I will confidently claim that my series is more informative than 99% of the rubbish you see on the internet in relation to Dark Souls as a series, so you can take your armchair psychologist perspective and shove it up your arse, mate. And that is what happened with that. I don't like pulling this card, and so, you know, honestly, don't worry about my actual mental health here, guys. I tend to be a brick wall with this sort of thing, but they both picked at my video and myself, insulting it and ridiculing me in front of their massive audiences for misunderstanding the game being discussed and the video created, encouraging others to do the same, which all would have been fine with me had either of them actually watched even a 10-minute stretch of any part of the the video. I have to say, I've lost a massive amount of respect for Folding Ideas. His attitude is just petty and childish. As for Harris, I don't expect him to respond well to 10 hours of criticism, but he could have just had an easygoing chat with me about it. Or hell, just ignore me instead of doing what he did. Ultimately, I offered to speak to Harris and Folding Ideas several times, but I was denied or ignored at every turn, and judging from this encounter, all I can say is that I think both of them aren't interested in discussion. Anything that is critical of things they love, or critical of themselves, they're just happy to echo chamber it right out. And I suppose it's offensive to try and burst that bubble. Honestly, if I ever get to their level of fame, I hope you guys hold me to a better standard than their fan bases hold them, because this whole thing was embarrassing to read through, as well as really disheartening in terms of, wow, is this what fame does to people? Though it was still neat to see them acknowledge my videos, and at the very least I gained some fans from the interaction too. Now, that is just about the end of this saga. First, I want to say congratulations to those who figured out the watermelon metaphor in my rant video, and that the next video to release on this channel is going to be a podcast followed by a new Rage video, so get hyper, folks. This podcast will be with two of my friends, and we'll be discussing Star Wars as a saga. If you'd like to submit a question for us to answer, then simply comment with what your favorite animal is, and then follow up with a question. Hell, you can ask two if you'd like. From there, I will collect them and sort them into 4 categories: the prequel trilogy, the original trilogy, the modern trilogy, and other. We will answer your questions and discuss Star Wars in general, so don't forget to leave yours in the comments. Thank you so much for sticking through all 5 or so hours of this mess, people. I hope you have an awesome day, and I will see you next time.
What a bunch of ignorant nonsense, just vapid pseudo-critical thinking and sophistry, as evidenced by your cavalcade of cognitive distortions and informal logical fallacies. Straw man argument, emotional reasoning, special pleading, non sequitur, double standard, etc. For starters, most of your criticisms do not describe qualities unique to The Last Jedi. What it comes down to is this: your superior expectations were not met. Oh, boo-hoo. Look, the world's smallest violin. How about you take an actual risk, write a script and pitch it to Disney? I mean, you are the divine arbiter of all that is right and good in cinema. Poor little man baby needs the writer and director to explain everything to him. You must really struggle with David Lynch films.
Roasted me.